It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon in Parkersburg, Iowa. Kids rode bikes down quiet streets. Windows stayed open. The smell of spring hung in the air. Then, at 4:56 p.m., a funnel larger than a football field appeared on the horizon. And everything changed. 8 minutes. That's all it took. 8 minutes for an entire town to vanish, for hundreds of homes to be wiped from their foundations, for 9 lives to be lost forever. This is the story of the Parkersburg tornado, the EF5 monster that nobody saw coming. And what you're about to witness will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about nature's power. Stay with me, because this is unlike anything you've ever seen. Parkersburg, Iowa. Population, 1,900 souls. A dot on the map in Butler County. Nestled in the heart of America's heartland. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Where Friday night football games draw the whole town. Where Main Street still matters. This wasn't just a town. It was a community. Schools, banks, homes, churches, all woven together in that easy Midwestern rhythm. That comfortable pace of life where Sundays meant church in the morning, family dinners in the evening, and kids playing outside until the streetlights came on. May 25th, 2008. Started like any other Sunday. Families at home, parents planning the week ahead, children finishing homework, playing video games, texting friends. Normal, safe, predictable. But nature doesn't care about normal. And on this Sunday, something was brewing. Something that would test every single person in this town in ways they could never imagine. The question isn't just what happened that day. It's how. How could an entire community be destroyed in minutes? How could homes that had stood for generations simply disappear? How could the sky itself become a weapon? We're going to answer those questions. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't just a story about a tornado. It's a story about 8 minutes that changed everything. Let me take you back to earlier that afternoon. While families in Parkersburg were living their normal Sunday, meteorologists across Iowa were watching something develop, something ominous. By early afternoon, weather radars picked up a disturbance forming across northeast Iowa, a supercell. The kind of storm system that makes forecasters sit up straight in their chairs. The Storm Prediction Center, the elite group that monitors severe weather across the entire United States. They issued a tornado watch at 3:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Now, here's what you need to understand about tornado watches versus warnings. A watch means conditions are favorable. The ingredients are there. A tornado could form. A warning means one has formed. It means take cover now. At 3:30, this was still just a watch. But the meteorologists, they knew. They could see the atmospheric conditions aligning, the wind shear, the instability, the moisture. Every ingredient needed for a violent tornado was coming together like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Dew points in the upper 60s. Cape values exceeding 3,000 joules per kilogram. A powerful upper-level jet stream. If that sounds like technical jargon to you, let me translate. The atmosphere was a loaded gun, and northeast Iowa was in the crosshairs. On radar screens, forecasters watched as the supercell intensified. They saw the classic hook echo forming, that telltale signature that screams, "Tornado imminent." The storm was organizing, strengthening, moving northeast at about 30 miles per hour, and it was heading straight for Parkersburg. But here's the thing about warnings. They're only as good as the people who receive them. In Parkersburg, life continued. Some people had heard about the watch. Maybe they'd checked their phones, seen the weather alert. Maybe they'd glanced at the sky, noticed it looked a bit darker to the southwest. But this was Iowa. This was Tornado Alley. Watches happened all the time, especially in spring. Most of them, nothing. Kids were still outside. Families were still at home, relaxed. The local grocery store was still open. Sunday routines continued without interruption. Because here's the brutal truth. Until you've experienced a tornado, until you've felt that primal fear, until you've heard that freight train roar, Warnings are just words. Just words. At 4:22 p.m., everything changed. The National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Butler and Grundy counties. The sirens began to wail. That sound, that rising and falling wail that cuts through everything. If you've never heard a tornado siren in real life, it's different than you think. It doesn't sound like danger. It sounds like the end. Some people immediately went to their basements, grabbed their kids, their pets, their most precious belongings. They knew. Others hesitated. We'll be fine. It's probably nothing. The sirens go off all the time. That hesitation, for some, would be the difference between life and death. Because at 4:48 p.m., 2 miles south of Parkersburg, near the Butler-Grundy County line, the tornado touched down. Picture this: a spring afternoon, farmland, fields of emerging corn, pastures with cattle grazing, the kind of landscape that defines rural Iowa. Then, from the base of the supercell, a funnel begins to descend. At first, it's almost graceful, a slender cone reaching down from the dark clouds above. But as it touches the ground, it begins to change. The funnel widens. Dust and debris are sucked upward in a violent spiral. The tornado has made contact with Earth, and it's hungry. Meteorologists would later determine this was already an EF5 at touchdown. Winds between 136 and 165 miles per hour. Strong enough to destroy well-constructed homes. Strong enough to turn everyday objects into missiles. But this tornado wasn't done strengthening. As it moved northeast, toward Parkersburg, it began to grow. The funnel expanded from a few hundred yards wide to a quarter mile, then half a mile, and it was accelerating, intensifying, becoming something truly monstrous. The few people who saw it approach from the countryside, they described it as looking like a black wall, not a classic funnel, not a graceful cone, a wall, nearly 3/4 of a mile wide, black as midnight, with multiple vortices swirling around the main circulation. A multi-vortex wedge tornado. If you don't know tornado terminology, let me make this simple. This was the worst kind, the kind that makes veteran storm chasers turn around and run, the kind that erases everything in its path. And it was 8 minutes. From Parkersburg, inside the town, the sirens continued to wail. Most people were now in their basements, huddled in bathrooms, sheltered in interior rooms away from windows, doing everything they'd been taught to do. But some still didn't believe it was real. One survivor would later recall looking out her window, seeing the western sky. "It was green," she said. "I've never seen a sky that color. It was like the world was ending." Green skies. In tornado lore, green skies mean hail. They mean a powerful updraft. They mean the storm is at peak intensity. Another resident described hearing the sirens but thinking they had time. "I went to grab some photo albums from upstairs," he remembered. "I thought we had a few more minutes. I thought—" He never finished grabbing those albums, because at 4:56 p.m., the tornado reached Parkersburg. It entered the town from the south, and what happened next can only be described as obliteration. Imagine, for just a moment, you're in your basement. You hear the sirens. You hear the wind beginning to pick up. Your ears pop from the pressure change. Then, you hear it, that sound, that legendary freight train roar that every tornado survivor talks about. But it's not like a train in the distance. It's like 1,000 trains. Right on top of you, the walls shake, the floor vibrates, and then, for those in the direct path, the house just lifts. One woman later described it like this, and I want you to really hear this. The roof just lifted off, like someone had grabbed the corners and pulled, and then the walls started coming apart, piece by piece, board by board, and we were just tumbling, spinning. I couldn't tell which way was up. At 4:56 p.m., the tornado was 3/4 of a mile wide. Wind speeds, at the core, were later estimated at 205 miles per hour. EF5, the highest rating on the Enhanced Fujita Scale. The category reserved for tornadoes that achieve incredible wind speeds. Tornadoes that don't just damage structures, they erase them. Less than 1% of all tornadoes reach EF5 intensity. This was one of them. In less than 5 minutes, the tornado carved a path of total destruction through the southern part of Parkersburg. Entire blocks vanished. Not damaged, not destroyed, vanished. When I say vanished, I need you to understand what that means. These weren't mobile homes or flimsy structures. These were solid, well-built Midwestern homes. Homes with basements. Homes anchored to concrete foundations with bolts. Homes that had survived Iowa winters and storms for decades. And they were gone. The survey teams from the National Weather Service would later walk these neighborhoods and find only concrete slabs. The homes that had stood there swept completely away. In some cases, they found the foundation, and nothing else. Not a toilet, not a bathtub, not even the anchor bolts that had held the house down. Just bare concrete. The debris, it didn't land in the yard. It was carried away. Some of it found miles downwind. Granulated into pieces no larger than coins. The Parkersburg High School, a massive brick structure built to withstand anything Iowa could throw at it, had its gymnasium ripped apart, the metal framework twisted like taffy, bricks scattered across the football field like confetti. The Applington-Parkersburg Elementary School, devastated. Banks, their vaults exposed to the sky. Churches, reduced to piles of splintered wood and shattered stained glass. Trees weren't just knocked down, they were debarked. Stripped completely clean. Some were snapped off at ground level, others ripped from the earth, roots and all, then driven into the ground like javelins hundreds of feet away. Vehicles, cars, trucks, SUVs were thrown like toys. One truck was found wrapped around a tree. Another was never found, simply gone. And the people caught in this. Mary Johnson, not her real name, was in her basement with her husband when the tornado hit. "I heard it coming," she remembered. "Everyone says it sounds like a freight train, but it's more than that. It's like the sound of the world being torn apart, like God himself was angry. We were holding on to the drain pipe in the basement, just holding on, and then I looked up at the basement window, and my washing machine was just gone, sucked right out. And the walls, they started to crack. The pressure made my ears pop so hard I thought my eardrums burst. And then I couldn't hear anymore. Just this roar, this thing on top of us. When it stopped, I looked for my husband. He was right there, 3 feet away, covered in insulation and dust. We just stared at each other. We couldn't believe we were alive. When we climbed out of the basement, our house was gone, all of it. We were just standing in a pile of rubble, and around us, everything was gone. Mary and her husband were among the lucky ones. They survived. 9 people didn't. After the storm passed, after the rescue operations began, engineers and meteorologists descended on Parkersburg to conduct damage surveys. What they found defied belief. Reinforced concrete light poles, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, twisted into spirals. The metal bent like it was clay. Trees, as I mentioned, completely debarked. When a tornado is powerful enough to strip bark from a tree, that tells you about the abrasive power of the debris field. Thousands of pieces of material, traveling at over 200 miles per hour, scouring everything they touch. But here's what really shocked the engineers. Homes that were bolted to their foundations. Modern homes, homes built to code, homes with anchor bolts connecting the walls to the concrete slab, designed to prevent exactly this kind of failure, and they were swept away. When a tornado can remove a properly anchored home from its foundation, that speaks to extraordinary force. The wind speeds required, the uplift and lateral forces. It's almost unthinkable. The damage indicators, every single one pointed to EF5 intensity. Ground scouring, check. Vehicles thrown over 500 feet, check. Complete destruction of well-constructed homes, check. Debarking of hardwood trees, check. This wasn't just a tornado. This was nature at its most violent, its most unstoppable, and it wasn't done. At 5:09 p.m., 13 minutes after devastating Parkersburg, the tornado reached New Hartford. New Hartford was smaller than Parkersburg, a village of just over 500 people, close-knit, quiet. The kind of place where everybody really does know everybody. They'd heard what happened in Parkersburg. The word had spread. Some had even seen the massive funnel cloud approaching from the southwest. But here's the cruel reality of tornadoes. Sometimes, even when you know they're coming, there's nothing you can do. The tornado struck just north of the town center, and once again, it brought a 5 devastation. Homes swept from foundations, vehicles thrown, trees stripped bare. In the cemetery, headstones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, were toppled and thrown. Monuments that had stood for over a century, scattered like leaves. One subdivision on the north edge of town, completely obliterated. Later analysis would show that some homes were swept so completely that even the floor joists were removed. Just the foundation slab remained, bare and empty, as if the homes had never existed at all. And still, the tornado continued east, growing wider, now over a mile across at its base. A monster, a thing of pure destructive fury carving its way across the Iowa landscape. And then, silence. The roar stopped. The wind calmed. The sky began to lighten as the storm moved away to the east. In Parkersburg and New Hartford, survivors began to emerge from basements, from bathrooms, from the rubble of what had been their homes just minutes before. And what they saw? One survivor described it as looking at a war zone. Another said it was like a bomb had gone off. But maybe the most haunting description came from a teenage girl who climbed out of her basement to find her entire street gone. It was flat, she said. Just flat, like someone had taken a giant eraser and just wiped everything away. I couldn't even tell where my neighbors' houses had been. The devastation was complete, apocalyptic. Streets were blocked with debris, power lines down everywhere, gas lines ruptured, water mains broken, and the sounds of people crying, calling out for loved ones, for neighbors, for help. Within minutes, sirens filled the air again. But this time, they were emergency vehicles, police, fire, ambulances, converging on the disaster zone from every direction. First responders arrived to find chaos, injured people wandering in shock, families searching desperately through rubble, homes on fire from natural gas leaks, downed power lines sparking and snapping. The sun was still up. The evening light cast long shadows across the devastation, and in that golden hour light, the scale of destruction became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't going to be a simple cleanup. This was going to be a long, painful recovery. But the tornado, it wasn't finished. Even as rescue operations began in Parkersburg and New Hartford, the monster continued its march across northeast Iowa. It moved through rural areas north of Waterloo and Cedar Falls. The tornado was no longer at peak intensity, but it was growing, expanding. By the time it reached the area north of Dunkerton, the damage path had widened to nearly 1.2 miles across. Think about that for a moment. 1.2 miles. That's not a tornado. That's a weather apocalypse, a swath of destruction over a mile wide, carving across the landscape. Farmsteads destroyed, barns obliterated, grain bins turned into shrapnel, livestock killed. And even areas outside the main tornado path weren't safe. The supercell that spawned this tornado, it was producing straight-line winds in excess of 90 miles per hour. At 5:37 p.m., the Waterloo Regional Airport recorded a wind gust of 93 miles per hour. 93 miles per hour. That's Category 2 hurricane winds. And that was outside the tornado itself. Trees down across the region, roofs torn off buildings, power outages affecting thousands. The destruction wasn't limited to the tornado path. It spread, like ripples from a stone thrown in water. The storm's fury reached far beyond the funnel. Finally, at approximately 5:50 p.m., after 70 minutes on the ground, after carving a path of 43 miles, after devastating 2 towns and countless farms, the tornado lifted. It dissipated just before entering Buchanan County. The funnel retreated back into the clouds, the connection severed, and it was over. But for the people of Parkersburg and New Hartford, for the families who lost loved ones, for the hundreds who lost everything they owned, it was just beginning. In the hours that followed, as darkness fell over the disaster zone, the true scale of devastation became clear. 9 lives lost, 70 people injured, over 300 homes destroyed, damage estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But numbers can't capture what really happened that day. They can't capture the terror, the loss, the way an entire community's sense of security was shattered in 8 minutes. In the next part of this story, we're going to dig deeper. We're going to understand the science. Why was this tornado so destructive? What made it different from other EF5 events? We're going to hear more survivor stories, stories of loss, but also stories of incredible heroism and hope. And we're going to see how a town, how a community rebuilds from nothing. Because this story isn't just about destruction. It's about what happens after. So, let's talk about what made this tornado so incredibly destructive. Because here's the thing. EF5 tornadoes are rare. Exceptionally rare. Since the Enhanced Fujita Scale was implemented in 2007, there have been only 9 confirmed EF5 tornadoes in the United States. 9. Out of approximately 1,200 tornadoes per year, on average. That means less than 0.07% of tornadoes reach this intensity. The Parkersburg tornado was only the second F5 ever recorded under the new scale. It was the first F5 to strike Iowa since the Jordan tornado of 1976, 32 years earlier. So, what made this particular storm so violent? First, the atmospheric conditions were perfect. And I mean perfect in the worst possible way. The morning sounding from Davenport, Iowa showed extreme instability. Cape values, that's convective available potential energy, were exceeding 3,000 joules per kilogram. For reference, anything over 2,000 is considered highly unstable. The wind shear was exceptional, strong winds at the surface from the south-southeast. Upper-level winds from the southwest creating incredible turning of the wind with height. This rotation, this spin in the atmosphere, it's what gives supercells their power. Dew points were in the upper 60s and low 70s. That's tropical moisture. In Iowa, in May, the fuel for the storm. But atmospheric conditions alone don't explain why this tornado was so destructive. It was the structure of the tornado itself. Doppler radar analysis showed this was a multi-vortex tornado. What does that mean? Imagine a main tornado, and then smaller tornadoes, called subvortices, rotating around it. These subvortices can have even higher wind speeds than the main circulation. They create erratic, intense damage swaths within the larger path. One house might be completely destroyed, while another 50 feet away has moderate damage. It's unpredictable, chaotic, deadly. Second, the tornado's forward speed. Many violent tornadoes move fast, 30, 40, 50 miles per hour, which gives them less time to cause damage in any one location. But the Parkersburg tornado, it moved at about 25 miles per hour. That might not sound like much of a difference, but think about it. A slower-moving tornado spends more time over each location, more time to grind structures into dust, more time to scour the ground, more time to erase everything in its path. In Parkersburg, the tornado spent approximately 3 to 4 minutes over the main damage zone. 3 to 4 minutes of 200-mile-per-hour winds. Can you imagine? 4 minutes. 240 seconds of absolute devastation. That's an eternity when your house is being torn apart around you. Now, let's talk about the homes themselves, because this is where it gets truly sobering. After the tornado, structural engineers conducted detailed failure analysis on dozens of homes. They wanted to understand why modern, well-built homes were swept from their foundations, and what they found exposed some uncomfortable truths about residential construction. Most homes in Parkersburg were wood-frame construction, standard for the Midwest. Walls connected to a foundation slab with anchor bolts. Roof trusses connected to walls with hurricane ties or toenails. By code standards, these homes were adequate for the region, but code standards aren't designed for EF5 tornadoes. Here's what happens in an EF5 wind field. First, the wind creates massive pressure differences. The wind flowing over and around the house creates a lifting force, like an airplane wing. The house literally wants to fly. Second, the wind pressure on the walls creates lateral forces, pushing, pulling, trying to rack the structure sideways. Third, and this is critical, the tornado doesn't hit all sides of the house equally. It's rotating. So one wall might be experiencing inflow, while another is experiencing outflow. This creates torsional stress. The house twists, even with anchor bolts, even with proper connections. There's a limit to what residential construction can withstand. The engineers found that many homes failed at the connection between the walls and the foundation. The anchor bolts, 8 inches into concrete, half-inch diameter steel. They bent. Some pulled completely out. Once the walls separate from the foundation, it's over. The wind gets underneath. The house lifts. And then it tumbles, breaking apart as it goes. The debris field spreads across hundreds of yards. One engineer described finding pieces of a home over half a mile from its foundation. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Some homes didn't fail at the connections. They failed because the concrete slab itself was lifted. Think about that. A 4-inch thick concrete slab, reinforced with steel rebar, weighing tons, lifted and displaced. That's the power we're dealing with. That's EF5 intensity. That's nature at its most terrifying. Now, I mentioned earlier that the damage wasn't limited to the tornado itself. Let me explain what else was happening. The supercell that produced the Parkersburg tornado. It was a monster of a thunderstorm. The anvil cloud spread over 100 miles wide, and the storm was producing severe weather even outside the tornado circulation. Straight-line winds of 80 to 100 miles per hour affected areas south of the tornado path at 5:37 p.m. Just as the tornado was moving through the Dunkerton area, the Waterloo Regional Airport, which was about 15 miles from the tornado, recorded that 93-mile-per-hour wind gust I mentioned earlier. Trees down across the city, windows blown out of buildings, roofs damaged. And this was from the outflow of the storm. The surge of air pushed ahead of the updraft. Baseball-sized hail fell in areas near the tornado path. Imagine, chunks of ice 3 inches in diameter, falling at terminal velocity, over 80 miles per hour, punching through car windshields, denting metal siding, destroying crops. One farmer reported hail punched holes in his metal machine shed, went straight through. And the rain. When the storm finally moved past, torrential rain fell on the disaster zone, complicating rescue efforts, turning debris fields into muddy morasses, making already dangerous conditions even worse. Because nature doesn't stop, doesn't care about your tragedy, doesn't give you time to breathe. The storm complex continued eastward through the evening. More severe weather, more damage, more warnings. But by the time night fell, the worst was over, and the real work was just beginning. Let me tell you about the 9 people who didn't survive, because they weren't just statistics. They were people, neighbors, friends, family members. The youngest victim was just 2 years old, a toddler, barely old enough to understand what a storm even was. The oldest was 73, a grandmother, a pillar of the community. someone who had lived through decades of Iowa storms, but couldn't survive this one. 4 victims were from the same extended family, 3 generations, torn from each other in moments. One man died trying to protect his family. His body was found shielding his children. They survived, he didn't. How do you process that? How do you survive knowing someone you love used their body as your shield? And it still wasn't enough. One victim was a high school student, 17 years old. Her entire life ahead of her. Dreams, plans, future, gone in 8 minutes. The survivors, the family members left behind. They carried a burden that numbers can never capture. Why them and not me? What if we'd gone to the basement sooner? What if we'd left town? Survivor's guilt is real. It's crushing. It's a weight that doesn't fade with time. One woman I read about, she lost her husband in the tornado. She survived in the basement. He died upstairs trying to grab their wedding photos. Those photos. They were found 3 days later, 2 miles away. Muddy, torn, but recognizable. She keeps them in a frame on her nightstand. Even now, over 15 years later, because grief doesn't have an expiration date. Loss doesn't heal. It just becomes part of who you are. But amid the loss, there were also stories of incredible heroism. Within minutes of the tornado passing, neighbors were helping neighbors. People who had just survived a nightmare, emerging from their own destroyed homes to search for others. 70 injuries were reported. 70 people hurt badly enough to need medical attention. Broken bones, lacerations, head injuries, internal injuries. But it could have been so much worse. Hundreds of people were in the path. Hundreds. And the fact that only 9 died, while tragic, speaks to several things. The warning system worked. Most people took shelter. The sirens gave people time to react. And when it was over, the community responded with incredible speed. First responders from across the region converged on Parkersburg and New Hartford. Fire departments, police, EMS, search and rescue teams. But the roads were blocked, power lines down, debris everywhere. Emergency vehicles couldn't get to many areas, so they walked, carrying equipment, stretchers, medical supplies, and civilians. Ordinary people became first responders too. A farmer with a tractor began clearing debris from streets. Within an hour, he'd opened access for emergency vehicles. A nurse who lived 2 blocks from the worst damage set up a triage station in her driveway, treating injuries, stabilizing patients, coordinating evacuations. A local construction worker, his own home destroyed, organized a team to search through rubble. They worked through the night, using their bare hands, calling out, listening for responses. They pulled 3 people from collapsed structures, 3 lives saved because someone refused to give up. Refused to stop searching. That's the human spirit. That's what rises from the ashes when everything else falls. Within hours, Governor Chet Culver issued a disaster proclamation for Butler County. Within days, President George W. Bush declared it a federal disaster area. FEMA mobilized. The National Guard deployed. The American Red Cross set up emergency shelters. Parkersburg residents who had lost everything, who had nowhere to go, found beds, food, basic necessities. Churches across Iowa organized donation drives, clothes, food, toiletries, school supplies. Construction companies from surrounding states sent crews. Volunteers arrived by the hundreds, bringing chainsaws, trucks, equipment, the debris removal. It was monumental. Thousands of tons of material. Shattered homes, broken furniture, destroyed vehicles. All of it had to be sorted, loaded, hauled away. But here's what struck me most about the recovery. The people of Parkersburg, they didn't just accept help. They organized it. Community leaders established distribution centers, donation coordination, volunteer scheduling. One local business owner, his store destroyed, set up a makeshift headquarters in his garage, running the logistics of recovery from a space barely larger than a bedroom. That's resilience, not just surviving, but fighting back, refusing to let tragedy win. But I don't want to romanticize this. Recovery wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. It wasn't some heartwarming montage where everyone sings and rebuilds and everything's fine. It was hard. Families living in temporary housing for months, years in some cases, insurance battles, construction delays, financial strain, the emotional toll of seeing your town, your home, in ruins every single day. Some people, they couldn't take it. They left, moved away, started over somewhere else. And you can't blame them. You really can't. Because sometimes the memories are too painful, the scars too deep. But most stayed. One resident, a man who lost his home, his business, nearly everything, said something that stuck with me. We lost everything, but we still had each other. And that's what matters. Not the houses, not the stuff, the people. Another survivor. A mother who sheltered her 3 kids in a bathtub as their home disintegrated around them. She said, "I could rebuild a house. I couldn't rebuild my children. We survived. Everything else, we'd figure out." And they did figure it out. The high school rebuilt. Better than before, with a storm shelter that could hold the entire student body. The elementary school, reconstructed with reinforced walls, impact-resistant windows, multiple safe rooms. Homes rose from empty foundations. New buildings replaced destroyed ones. Streets were repaved, trees were replanted, but they didn't just rebuild what was there, they built better. Parkersburg became a model for tornado-resistant construction. Many new homes were built with ICF, insulated concrete forms, reinforced concrete walls that could withstand incredible wind forces. Safe rooms became standard, not luxuries, standard. Building codes were strengthened. Anchoring requirements increased. Wind resistance ratings raised. Because the lesson, the hard, terrible lesson, was clear. You can't stop tornadoes, but you can build to survive them. The Parkersburg tornado changed how meteorologists think about tornado forecasting and warning. The warning was issued 26 minutes before the tornado hit the town. That's exceptional lead time. The national average is about 13 to 14 minutes. And yet, 9 people died. So the question became, how do you make warnings more effective? It's not enough to issue a warning. People have to receive it, understand it, and act on it. In the years following Parkersburg, the National Weather Service implemented several changes. Impact-based warnings. Instead of just saying tornado warning, they started categorizing threats. Tornado emergency. Particularly dangerous situation. Language designed to convey urgency. Wireless emergency alerts. Pushing warnings directly to cell phones. No app needed, no subscription required. If you're in the warning area, your phone will alert you. Social media integration. Using Twitter, Facebook, all platforms to disseminate warnings faster and wider. Because in the age of smartphones, the old methods weren't enough anymore. Sirens are great if you're outside, if you can hear them. But if you're inside, watching TV with the sound up, headphones on, you might miss it. The Parkersburg tornado also reinforced the importance of NOAA weather radio, that dedicated emergency radio system that broadcasts warnings 24/7. After the tornado, weather radio distribution in Iowa increased dramatically. Schools, businesses, homes, everyone wanted one. But technology only goes so far. The human element matters too. In downtown Parkersburg, there's a memorial now. 9 names, etched in stone. 9 lives that ended too soon. The youngest, 2 years old. The oldest, 73. Every year on May 25th, the community gathers. They read the names, they share memories, they light candles. Because forgetting would be the final tragedy. One of the surviving family members. She spoke at the 10-year memorial, and what she said, I think it captures something essential. We don't gather here to remember the tornado. We gather here to remember them, the people we lost, their smiles, their laughs, the way they made us feel loved. That's what we remember, not the storm, the people. The tornado took 9 lives, but it didn't take their memory, their impact, the love they left behind. And in a strange way, their loss gave the community purpose to rebuild, to prepare, to make sure, if it ever happens again, fewer people die. That's their legacy. Let me put this tornado in broader context. 2008 was an active year for severe weather. Over 1,600 tornadoes were confirmed, above average. But the Parkersburg tornado stood out. It was Iowa's first EF5 since 1976. 32 years, an entire generation had grown up never experiencing a tornado this violent. That matters, because it means people didn't have experience with worst-case scenarios. They'd lived through EF2 tornadoes, maybe an EF3, but EF5, that was theoretical, something that happened elsewhere, in Oklahoma, in Kansas, not here, and that's dangerous, because complacency kills. When you think, it can't happen here, you let your guard down, you don't take warnings seriously, you don't invest in safe rooms or storm shelters. The Parkersburg tornado shattered that complacency. It proved that anywhere in Tornado Alley, and Iowa is Tornado Alley, can experience the worst. Since 2008, Iowa has taken severe weather much more seriously. Schools conduct tornado drills regularly, communities have built public storm shelters, warning systems have been upgraded, because the lesson was learned, in blood and tears, but learned. And yet, tornadoes remain fundamentally unpredictable. We can forecast the conditions for tornadoes. We can warn when they form, but we can't predict their exact path, their exact intensity, how long they'll last. Nature keeps her secrets, and every year, despite all our technology, all our knowledge, tornadoes surprise us, catch us off guard, remind us that we're not in control. So, what does the Parkersburg tornado mean? What can we learn from 8 minutes that changed a town forever? First, respect nature. Respect it. We live in an age of climate control, of engineered environments, of buildings designed to shield us from the elements, and we forget how powerful nature truly is. A tornado is a reminder, a violent, terrifying reminder, that nature doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise, doesn't care about our buildings, our plans, our lives. It simply is. Second, community matters. When everything falls apart, when you've lost your home, your possessions, your sense of security, what remains? People. The Parkersburg community survived because they held together, because neighbors helped neighbors, because strangers became family. That's not sentimentality, that's survival. Third, preparation saves lives. The warning system worked, the sirens sounded, people took shelter, and because of that, hundreds of people lived who might have died. Yes, 9 people died, 9 too many. But in a disaster of this magnitude, with a direct hit on a populated area, it could have been dozens, or worse. Preparation matters, safe rooms matter, warning systems matter. And finally, resilience is a choice. The people of Parkersburg chose to rebuild, chose to stay, chose to fight. They could have given up, could have walked away, could have let the tornado win, but they didn't. They stood up, they cleared the rubble, they laid new foundations, they built again. That's the human spirit at its finest. It's been over 15 years now. Parkersburg today, if you didn't know its history, looks like any other small Iowa town. Neat houses, quiet streets, Friday night football games. But the people remember. They remember the sound, that freight train roar. They remember the fear, the crushing realization that this was real. They remember the aftermath, the shock, the loss, and they remember the strength it took to keep going. One survivor told a reporter, something that I think sums it up perfectly. Every time a storm warning comes now, I'm back there, in that basement, holding my family, hearing that roar, but I don't freeze, I don't panic, I act, because I know what can happen, and I know we can survive it. That's the legacy of May 25th, 2008. Not just destruction, not just loss, but knowledge, experience, strength. The Parkersburg tornado was one of the most violent tornadoes in modern U.S. history. EF5, 200-mile-per-hour winds. A path 43 miles long, 9 lives lost, hundreds of homes destroyed. But it was also a story of survival, of community, of resilience. And maybe that's what we need to remember most, not just the terror of that day, but what came after, the rebuilding, the healing, the determination to not let tragedy define them. Because tornadoes, they destroy things, but they can't destroy spirit, can't destroy love, can't destroy the human will to survive. When the winds calm, when the debris settles, what remains? We remain, scarred, changed, but alive. And that's what matters. The sky doesn't apologize. Nature doesn't explain itself. On May 25th, 2008, a tornado touched down near Applington, Iowa. It grew, it intensified, and it carved a path of devastation that will never be forgotten. 8 minutes of violence that ended 9 lives and changed the hundreds more. But here's what I want you to take away from this. It's not just about the tornado. It's about us, about how we respond, how we rebuild, how we hold each other up when everything falls apart. The people of Parkersburg didn't just survive, they thrived. They took the worst day of their lives, and they turned it into a lesson, a memorial, a commitment to be better prepared, to build stronger, to love harder. And if that's not a message of hope, I don't know what is. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to this story, for honoring the memory of those 9 people who didn't survive, for understanding what this community went through. If you learned something, if this story moved you, please share it, because these stories, they matter. They remind us of our vulnerability and our strength. Stay safe out there. Take warning seriously. Have a plan. Protect your family, because we can't control nature, but we can control how we prepare for it. This was the story of the Parkersburg tornado, a story of loss and survival and the unbreakable human spirit.